Hey, deserving listeners, let's watch.
Were you disciplined by Christina and Mike? Okay, tell me about that.
They didn't really whoop me or nothing like that.
Okay. Did anyone ever put their hands on you?
Okay, so now we hear from Natalia that she was never whooped. And what does that say? And is Natalia lying? Is Michael lying? Is Jacob lying? I don't know.
That means physically, did anyone physically harm you?
No, but I know they did. Well, actually, did I say they didn't whoop me?
Initially, Natalia.
So then she says, wait, did I say? Now, it's possible that Natalia, her memory is spotty because of not only the abuse she went through, if she did in fact go through abuse, but also if she went through abuse or very difficult situations prior to even coming to the United States, then it will create dissociative tendencies that can cause people to dissociate in moments of terror that will make it more difficult to recall the memories. It doesn't make it impossible, but when people develop what we might call pathological lying or compulsive lying, it's also possible that she's used to lying. When people develop what we might call pathological lying or compulsive lying, they will lie when they don't want to lie, because it's better. If you want to be believed, if you want your lies to be believed, the faster and more convincingly you lie, the more believable it is, right? If someone asks you, were you there last night? And you say, no, then people don't believe you, right? But if you say, were you there last night? No, I wasn't there. Then it's much more believable. So it creates, this habit for people, often because they're being abused and they have to lie, that they will by default lie, particularly when it's a tension question. That's weird, but especially when the question has a lot of weight to it, like, did your parents beat you? And there'll just be this automatic, without any thought, just lie. And some of you have even said in the comments section that you have this condition, and it might not be all the time, but you'll notice that sometimes someone will ask you, what time is it? And you'll lie, and you'll think, why did I just lie? Often it's because of this adaptation that you needed to develop when you were younger in order to avoid being abused or harmed or terrified or something. And so it's possible that through that pathological lying mechanism, she just lied.
In her interview with the forensic interviewer, with the prosecutor's office, she's made a lot of conflicting statements, and they are memorialized in police reports.
No, they whooped me, how sometimes parents, they whoop you with a belt. They did whoop me. She literally let the boys whoop me.
She let the 3 boys whoop you?
Yes.
Okay.
So hard to believe her, right? But we can, if we're acting like we're a jury, I suppose. That's kind of how I'm feeling. That's why it feels to me. It feels like, I don't know if I've watched something that made me feel so much like a jury member. But so if she had said just a general statement, yeah, I know they would beat me with a belt, but we hear this language going towards the mom, and then this detail of, yeah, she would let the boys beat me, which isn't uncommon. We've seen that on some of these abusive family vloggers on YouTube. The Family 05, I think it was called. There was documentation of this. Yeah, it's horrific, right? It's horrific to abuse your child. It's even more horrific to abuse your other children to abuse your child. Because, the children that are coerced or influenced to abuse one of their siblings, they don't come out of that unscathed.
Jacob, he just dropped me. That's all.
When you say he just dropped you, what does that mean?
He literally...
he just dropped you?
Yeah.
So did he pick you up?
It's also hard to know the circumstances. It's possible that she was the initiator of the altercation and then Jacob responded or something. But it's also possible, I guess I hadn't thought about this directly anyway, that Jacob might be hesitant to get into it because he knows that he did things. Now, he could absolutely make a case that he was a victim too and was only doing things to her and maybe the other boys because the mom was influencing and or coercing him to doing it.
When the three boys were whooping you, who was in the room?
Christine. She was sitting right on my bed. First she whooped me.
And then, of course, we understand that as a child, if you witness your mother beating other people, then you often will have that modeled to you and will mimic that behavior. It's told to you and taught to you very viscerally that when you're frustrated and you can overpower someone, then that's what you do.
Then she had the boys, and then Michael whooped me.
And then Michael whooped you. Okay.
And then we hear that Michael would also beat her, which seems likely to me. So there's a number of possibilities. One is that I think what Michael is saying is, I tried to do something about it, but I was terrified. And he used language of a victim. He could have adopted it. He could have, he could be faking it, but that is the language of a legit victim that will say, I didn't feel strong enough to do anything against the abuser. Today I would, but back then I couldn't, because you get broken down over time. So also when you're in a marriage and you're trying to make it work, there's a lot of reasons to not say something, to not call the police, right? To try to influence from within. It's like, well, if I really want to affect change, I need to get her on my side, so I can't, the way that Jacob basically seemingly was saying, right? If I'm really going to help my mom, I can't tell the truth. And that's really the conundrum of the victim, right? And that's what abusers want you to think, right? They want you to be in that position, right? So it's possible that Michael was terrified and didn't contact the authorities or anybody. I mean, that is common, by the way. And he didn't beat her at all, didn't beat Natalia at all. And Natalia is just lying or misremembering or something. She's pretty young at the time. She's a lot older now. So that's one possibility. The other possibility is that he did absolutely participate in the abuse and that Natalia is telling the truth right now. It kind of sounds like truth because the story that she's telling has a lot of details. It's pretty quickly, told to the evaluator. And I don't know, it doesn't, unless she has had this lie frequently, but it doesn't seem exaggeratory. So there's that, because the reason, I guess, okay, this is what I want to say, is that it's very likely, it's very believable, I'll say. I don't know the likelihood, but it's very believable that Michael would also physically harm Natalia. Maybe not as much, maybe as much, but it's not hard to imagine. Although, I don't know, when I say that out loud, is that just throwing victims under the bus? Because what am I basing that on? I don't know. We'll wait for more. And of course, we're not hearing from Christine, and I'm guessing that Christine, whether it's true or not, would also say so. We would have to hear from the kids, which is hard to, depend on them. Like with Jacob, he seems to be against Christine and not against Michael. But the other kids, if you talk to them, they probably would be the opposite. And both of them saw everything that happened, or a lot of things that happened, right? So what does that say? Well, what that says is that us humans are influenceable, and our conscious minds are influenceable, and our fears will dictate the kinds of things we'll allow ourselves to say or even believe or know or remember. So it's hard to know. It's just one of those things. They haven't revealed if the cell phone is going to work or not regarding a file. I have a feeling it won't, but if it does, but all that would help us to know that Christine was abusive. It wouldn't tell us if Michael was or was not abusive. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. It's a new year, so of course it's time for New Year's resolutions. But often, those are just manifestations of internalized harmful voices that tell us we're not good enough. So instead of making a resolution to change something, let's recognize that we are already good enough. Now, most people think of therapy as a place for us to work on our problems, but there are several schools of thought within the field of psychotherapy that adamantly reject that paradigm, like narrative therapy and solution-focused. Instead, these clinicians help us focus on what we're already doing well. And by helping us do that, data shows that we often will gravitate towards more beneficial patterns. Well, one place you can find such therapists is on BetterHelp. If you're thinking of starting therapy, it's definitely worth giving a try. So celebrate the progress you've already made. Visit betterhelp.com/Kirk today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Kirk.
One of Natalia's problematic behaviors was that she would frequently urinate in places where she shouldn't.
So we heard earlier allegations from Michael, I believe, that Natalia would purposely urinate on her brothers and smear her own feces on her brothers in the car. So we're also hearing that she would have trouble controlling herself, which is also very, very normal for kids who have been through those experiences. You know, potty training, if you've helped a child to go to the bathroom and the toilet, it's a thing, you know, it takes a while. It's not something that kids just automatically do, right? Other things you don't necessarily have to teach them, right? Like you don't have to teach children how to use nouns and verbs and adjectives. They just learn by watching. But with potty training, you know, there's a lot of details to it. I can kind of remember I do remember being potty trained by my dad. Actually, I'm pretty sure both my parents participated, but I remember my dad in particular. And me and my siblings, my 3 siblings, have a joke in our family that with most of us, if not all of us, we distinctly remember my dad telling us that we should only use 2 squares of toilet paper, which is absurd. Now, when you're very small, you have small amounts of things to wipe up, and so you don't need that much. And my dad was concerned with us kids just going zing on the toilet paper, you know, using way too much and clogging the pipes or whatever. And I don't know if he was saying use 2 and he knew that meant that we would use 4 or 5, but all of us still will razz my dad for he'll come out of the bathroom and be like, 2 squares, Dad? You know, that kind of thing. And, you know, he likes to do that kind of thing, so my dad takes it well. But I remember it. Do you remember it? Anyway, it's a thing. So point is that for a child that is completely abandoned, left alone, also very consistently parented, we heard from the aunt that she was with the bio mom, then another family, then the orphanage. And we also know that potty training takes some time. And if one family was working on that for a bit, but the next family would have to pick up where the old family had left off, and maybe that wasn't coordinated. Also, it's not unusual for neglected kids with neglectful parents or caregivers just to leave kids in diapers, because it's easier in the short term, you know, because you have to actually pay attention to a kid to potty train them. So that's that angle. But even kids that are potty trained, they can still have issues with control because it's a common expression of trauma. It's hard to know this, but it could be an adaptation that we evolved to signal to others that we're not doing okay. You know, it's similar to crying, actually. There's not a lot of ways that we can determine why we evolved to shoot water out of our eyes when we're sad or happy or nostalgic, or, you know, there's a lot of different emotions that produce that. Prideful, you know, when our kids do great on the soccer field, we might cry out of joy. So it's hard for us to figure out why we do that. A lot of people online and some scientists will say, well, we're trying to get rid of certain neurochemicals. And I can't say that that's inherently wrong, but that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It's not coherent with the way that tears work in our species. The way that tears work in our species is that it's not just tears too. It's like snot and potentially convulsive, like this, you know, and the wailing. It's an expression, just like laughing. You know, why do we have an uncontrollable, like, because we one, are telling other people how we are feeling, right? And there's facial expressions, there's like hundreds, I don't know how many muscles are involved in our facial expressions and our vocalizations. It's a lot of wasted effort to do something just to get rid of a neurochemical. It is a lot of effort to specifically signal to everyone around us how we're feeling. And because we're extremely social and very dependent on each other and knowing what other people are thinking. Because in order to survive in a group, a tribe, you have to gain their acceptance, because if you don't have their acceptance, then you're left to the wolves, literally, and you will die. So there's a lot of attention, and our species is very good at communicating what's going on in our hearts and in our minds. And so we cry to signal how we're feeling. Well, it's possible, it's kind of a leap, that we have other ways of excreting things to signal that we're not doing okay, right? And we might have benefited by having that mechanism to alert caregivers or kin to come to the young child and figure out what's going on. Is the child scared? Are they hungry? Are they suffering? Are they lonely or something? And once that has been corrected for, the incontinence goes away, right? An additional hypothesis as to why kids will do this after being traumatized is that due to PTSD developing, complex PTSD developing, the child is at baseline anxious. So if we have anxiety from 0 to 10, and for most people, if everything is going okay in their life, they're a 0 or a 1. For people who have been chronically terrorized, and abandonment can result in that chronic terror, but it's highly likely that she was also physically and or sexually abused in addition to being abandoned before she came to the States, and after maybe. But when children go through those kinds of things for the rest of their life, you can have people that at baseline are a 5, and they won't look like they're, if I'm at a 5, you'll probably know. But for someone that's always at a 5, you won't necessarily know, because they have learned to just act like everything is fine. Plus, they might think everything is fine because they're the least anxious they've ever been. It's one of the tragedies of, there's many tragedies, but it's one of the tragedies of early childhood abuse, that it's the gift that keeps on giving for the rest. You'll have people that are 60 years old and have never been below a 5. Now with treatment, there's optimism in terms of prognosis for sure. It can take time, but they're not doomed, but a lot of people don't get treatment, or not effective treatment or something. But anyway, or they don't have access to treatment. So another hypothesis is that when we are anxious, we adapted, and we see this in other animals too, to get rid of dead weight so we can run, right? And so that's another possibility. Another hypothesis is that when we're terrified or threatened, because when you have PTSD, complex PTSD, and other kinds of conditions related to trauma, you are more likely to consider things that aren't dangerous to be dangerous, right? And so you have a child that is just in a non-dangerous situation, but there's something threatening, and their body thinks of it as a massive threat, and the child might regress to an earlier phase that was before they were potty trained, and then that results in that behavior. There are other hypotheses as well, but I just thought I'd throw it out there. So he's saying that she did have problems, which, again, like I said, I would just assume that has to do with the trauma, unfortunately. It's just a really... This whole thing is just one big heartbreak to me, honestly. This whole thing is one big heartbreak.
Such as, for example, on blankets or on furniture such as a couch or a bed.
And I think he's building up to why his mom would go after her.
Mother was trying to address the situation, wasn't working. One solution my mom came up with was for me to urinate in Natalia's bed.
All right. Okay. So that's shocking and awful and horrible, but parents who do this, they don't just stop there, right? A parent, just think of what you would have to go through as a parent to even just come up with that idea. Just let alone just having that brainstorm in your mind. And then, even if you did, you'd think the vast majority of parents, even many abusive parents, well, that's ridiculous. What? No. But for a parent to then say, yes, I'm going to do this. I'm going to implement the plan. Wow. I'm going to ask my other child to do it. I'm going to I'm going to make another child do this. It's also out there in the family that you're doing it, right? So that says a lot that he is saying that to me. That is, that says way more than even what that is, because this is the first time that he has, affirmed that she is abusive, because he's been alluding to it. Michael has given a lot of descriptions, but beyond that, that's all that we have. We had Natalia saying that the mom was abusive, and Michael and her brothers, but we can't really know. It looked like a moment of honesty for Natalia, but that's hard to bank on. Jacob, though, he does, I think, have potential coercion happening around him by father. It could be happening, or at least he's trying to please his dad or something. But the specificity, you think if he was just trying to please his dad, he'd just say a blank, mom was abusive, I don't want to get to it. But to give this specific story, and I think the reason why he's telling this story is that he thinks this isn't as bad as the actual stories that he doesn't want to get into. It's also traumatic for him, for Jacob, right? These are not pleasant memories for him. And that's another tragedy of these sorts of situations, is that you'll have kids that are roped into the abuse and they walk away feeling like they're a monster, right? That they're part of the problem when they were children and they were being told to do something and they were being modeled to behavior. We often talk about victimization of abuse regarding the person who was being attacked, but we don't often talk about, and some of you might know situations like this, some of you might have been in situations like this, where you were made or coerced as a child to be a secondary abuser, and the shame of that, because victims often blame themselves anyway, if not universally. But if you actually did it and you tell people about it, they're likely to say, how come you did that? How come you didn't say no, right? But of course, those people don't understand how reality works. I don't blame them because we don't talk about it very much and it's complicated. But so, geez, wow.
She had pink blankets. The vivid part is just like basically the action. I remember feeling anger while I was doing it, like experiencing a thought like, oh, this will show her. Do we need more on this topic, or are we good? Or?
Yeah, I talked a while back about the trauma effects of recalling these memories, particularly speaking them out loud to people in detail, and how it can be re-traumatizing, or at the very least create a lot of emotion that can be difficult. And I don't know if he's been through treatment about this. I'm guessing he hasn't. They haven't been alluding to any of that sort of treatment. So for him, this could be really rough. For all the traumatized individuals, and really maybe everyone might be traumatized, even the mom, who knows, as they tell these stories, so very briefly, when someone comes into my office, say first session, and I ask them what they want to talk about, and they say, I want to talk about my childhood trauma, or even if it's the 50th session, but I haven't heard anything about it before, and I don't know their emotional regulation abilities and the extent of their trauma reactivity. What I will say to them is, okay, I want to hear this story, and I want you to talk about that for sure. That's partly why I became a therapist, was to be there for people as they tell me their stories of trauma that they've perhaps never told anybody before. And I've had a number of clients trust me and honor me with that role in their life, and I want to be there for you. However, if you just head into telling that story and you have a trauma condition that is triggered in that moment or after the session, overall, you could be harmed by that disclosure, by telling me that story. And so there are a number of things we have to do to make sure that we can monitor your distress level as you tell me this story, and you have ways to regulate that distress, whether you're in session or out of session. So we just have to be careful. So how do you feel about that? And then but for the documentarians, I don't know if they care about that. So there's a possibility that Jacob is actually causing himself a lot of psychological and physical symptoms now and in the future because he is now talking about things he might not have ever talked about.
She didn't give me instructions, man. Like she didn't like, oh, let's aim that way. Like I was never.
How are you feeling about it now? So this will be interesting, but I also wonder if he's telling this story because he wonders if, well, I should say something. I don't know exactly. Maybe it's the moral dilemma he was referring to earlier. But he surmises that if he tells this story, this more implicates him, he thinks. It doesn't implicate him at all. At all. It implicates the mom. So he might think, well, I'm telling a story, but it's more about me. And if my mom gets angry at me, I will say, I was throwing myself under the bus because, he was sure to say, she didn't tell me where to aim. She didn't tell me what to, I did those things. But no one in their right mind would say that was him doing it, that was his fault. That's the mom.
I had performed this action of urinating in Natalia's bed. And to this day, I feel horrible that I actually did that. It's one of those things that keeps me up at night.
Yeah, I don't doubt that. That I don't think it's just an expression that he says for emphasis. I think it might literally keep him up at night. That's what I was talking about earlier about the children or others who get roped in to the abuse perpetration against their will, so to speak. They're highly influenced. It's a similar trauma for cult members. You have a high control organization and you might have a few people at the top, maybe one person at the top, and then they brainwash people, and those people are brainwashed to maybe harm others. Like with Keith Raniere and the Nexium cult, I don't know this specifically, but I'm guessing that there were lieutenants to him. I know there was one in particular, but they were all told to do things, and then eventually they just do it on their own, right? Eventually you're so brainwashed you don't need to be told. You just do the plan because you've been brainwashed and scared into adopting someone else's mind, and then you walk away from the cult. And well, actually, like when I was watching Twin Flames, right? There was that one woman who was one of the lieutenants, so to speak, one of the top employees, and she had been coaching some of the other couples and was forcing them to do things that she now knows was very harmful, and she was crying about it. And, case by case basis, we might be able to say, you should have known better. Even though you were sort of brainwashed, that doesn't release you from responsibility. But a child, no.
Like I kind of feel like a Nazi following orders, in a way.
It's very smart, actually. That's very apt. I mean, it depends on what sort of Nazi you're talking about. But for the rank and file in Germany, a lot of them did horrific, horrible things, but they would never have done those things normally, right? So, yeah, and I hope that comforts him a little bit, right? Because you have millions upon millions of Germans that did horrific things. So maybe maybe that's him saying, like, look, it was horrible, and I should feel guilty, but I was also in a high control situation. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself, truly, because you deserve it. You really, really do.